therefore, in that sense, you have the joy of seeing how it will play out. From the multiplicity of possibilities, you will see how one particular version will play out and enjoy being surprised by it. This is one, shall I say, microcosmic analogy to your entire life. The idea of unfolding as if you are actually experiencing things for the first time. Now, many of you view this as a curse. But you may also understand, now that I have mentioned it, now that you are entertaining the notion, that you have chosen on some level to do this. That seeming amnesia only exists from where you are sitting, from your standpoint right now, from the perspective of your higher self, your soul, your oversoul, whatever you wish to call it. You already know what you are doing. You already are playing out a set of choices, so to speak, that you have laid down. So nothing occurs that is outside of your consciousness, outside of your being. Your consciousness is your infinite knowingness. What you refer to on your planet as your mentality is your finite version of knowingness. So you experience your mentality as an unfoldment. And from this perspective, it seems quite real. It seems like this is the only reality. This is the only, many times individuals will say, planet with intelligent life. Not true. And you may understand that that is a very narrow point of view. By excluding 99.9999 so on and so forth percent of reality, you focus in on a very fine fractionated portion of your totality. You may feel that seeing, thinking, hearing, smelling, feeling one thing at a time is the normal mode of operation. But from your higher self perspective, it is a unique experience, for your higher self has the ability to understand an infinite number of things at once. So therefore, one thing at a time is actually the exception rather than the rule. How you set up your reality here, so to speak, is by seeming as though one thing at a time is the rule, and playing that sense, that fine ability to focus down to one thing at a time. These are all built into the reasoning of your higher self for experiencing this type of reality. Now, the sense of amnesia that you impose upon yourself is so pervasive, is so all-inclusive, that you have conveniently, perhaps some of you will experience that inconveniently, forgotten even why you're here. But obviously, you are now beginning to allow yourself to attract the resources through whatever you read, whatever you find yourself attracted to, interactions such as this, to remind yourself through reflection, through a mirror, I am only...
All will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these...
And now we talk about the fluctuations of the
the universal love, the unity of us all. Even now my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men.
Maybe the universe, a vacuum fluctuations. We know that a small region of space filled with a Mars vacuum, it is enough to start the inflation.
The misery that is now upon us is but the task of the bitterness of men steer the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, the dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
High-energy false vacuum, any substance that is present in an origin, it becomes space, which leads to the downstairs vacuum.
Tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel. Who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate,
be possible to obtain
The
unity
kingdom
as
of God is within man, not one man, nor a group of men, but in all men, in you, the people, have the power. The power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill their promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
However, the universe contains only matter. Loss of antimatter cannot even mathematically. Where did the enemy
or suffering. So everybody is moving with the intention to bring happier days. But then, of course, just think of oneself. Not care about others. So because of that kind of motivation, there are actions between them, unrealistic, wrong action. As a result, these unwanted problems essentially created by ourselves. So therefore, we really need a healthy, proper mental attitude. That's very important. I think we pay adequate sort of attention about material
anxious is the person who is resisting the flip-flopability of things. Life is vibrating. It's going blip, 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 blip all the time. And the anxious person says, God's sake, don't do that. Because, you know, you might do it too much. I don't want to blip like this. It makes me feel nervous. Stop it. And so, as he puts his weight on this blip, blip, he goes like this. You see, it gets trembling. So instead of saying, come on, let's blip, see, let's go, and do this thing. So in exactly the same way, the person who wants to say, well, you're nothing but some kind of chemicals, and they're just a lot of, you're a bag of pus and blood, basically, with a few bones inside. And that person is doing the same thing, you see, as the person who's putting pressure on the flip-flopability of things, and so he gets anxious. And the person who does this, he wants to say, he's always, look, think about your friends and the people who are philosophical and enthusiastic materialists. They're always going to pose themselves as a certain kind of hero. After all, you're just a dreamer, but I face facts. See? I'm a hard-headed realist. And I'm as a matter of fact, I'm an intellectual porcupine. I have my prickles out all over the place, because I'm the kind of person who, in the academic world at any rate, is full of rigor. I ask, what precisely is the evidence about this? And I'm analytical. And I'm, believe in, I don't like woolly and vague thinking. I like it clear cut. And you can see that porcupine's bristle going right through like that. See, well, this is a personality type who wants to play that role, whose message in saying all this jazz is, I'm the kind of person who is all dry as a bone. But I believe that that is strength, and that's reality. And another kind of person says to him, oh, you are intolerable. You're so dry, you're so dull, you rattle. You don't have any juice in you. And what we need is juice. And we need flow. We need lilt and rhythm and gaiety, you see. So that's an opposed mythology. And that's another character part you're going to play. But so we've got to consider, these are games, you see, as I tried to show you earlier. The kind of roles we play are the kind of games we play. So, but the question is, which is the optimal game? Certainly we can't do without some prickly people, because life is prickles and goo. And it's basically gooey prickles and prickly goo, but the gooey people are always trying to make out that it's only goo, and the prickly people are always trying to make out it's only prickles. Now we do need both, see? But the question is fundamentally, which game works better? The game that resists the vibration, the flip-flop, or the game that goes with it? Obviously the game that goes with it, that cooperates with the
field, and in these great sand dunes we would see strange creatures like these. And what could these be? Well, we would have the following kind of argument. We would say, look, in this place there are stilted lumps. There's lumps about that size connected to the ground by 4 stilts, and many of them stretching as far as we can see. Now, how do you make stilted lumps? Well, there are no weather ways to make it. There don't seem to be any geology ways to make it. Probably it's a biology way to make it. Not only that, things get rubbed down on the earth. There are sandstorms which rub things down, running water rub things down. And we could calculate that in the period of only a few thousand years, the stilts will all be rubbed away and the lumps should be on the ground. So these stilted lumps have been made in the last few thousand years. There's some machinery on the earth for making stilted lumps at least every few thousand years, maybe much faster. And I think we would have to deduce that that was due to biology, and perhaps these are the dominant organisms. Then we would look closer. Here is a set of interesting creatures which would then be gone about 2 minutes later. This is in fact a flock of flamingos. And if we now look at another picture, here we have for the first time the organisms that we truly know to be the dominant organism, human beings. This is a great outdoor swimming pool. Each dot is a dominant organism. And nearby there are blankets, and on each blanket there are 1 or 2 dominant organisms. But to see what the dominant organisms are really like, we have to go still closer. And if we really did that, we would finally come to grips with the true nature of the dominant organism on the planet. Now, I'd like to do just for a moment, a stepping back, and let's examine still another picture. We have up to now looked only at the Earth in reflected sunlight. Here's the Earth in emitted light. Up at the top we see, this is North America, up at the top we see a very bright light, which is in fact the aurora borealis. But down here, all these other lights are due to cities at night. Here, for example, is the New York to Washington corridor, and so on. So the Earth, due to its intelligent life, shines at night. Here is a remarkable picture made of the Earth in radio waves. It shows the Earth emitting to space in radio radiation. And look, the map is exactly like in the geography books. And the people who wrote the geography books were never in space. So they did a very good job. And here, this is part of a plaque on a long-lived spacecraft. And here we have the configuration of continents some 200 million years ago when they were all almost together and touching. Due to what is called plate tectonics or continental drift, the continents move apart. Here is their present configuration. And some 8 million years from now, here's what the continents will look like. Britain seems to be still here. Italy seems to be missing. Seem to be a lot of new places in the Indian Ocean. And as I mentioned, over here, you can see California having drifted out to sea. That's merely to mention that the configuration of the continents of the Earth is true only for now. At another time, it'll be quite different. Now, to show some familiar geography, you may recognize these small islands.
we call the higher self. It's the consciousness, the conscious being that you are. Because as you go within, you don't immediately dissolve into God as the
simplest building block of a three-dimensional reality. So it's the simplest 3D bit of information, and that would be the three simplex known as the tetrahedron. And get a three-dimensional shadow, if you want to call it that. We project a slice of E8 crystal down to 3D, which produces a quasi-crystal code or language. And that allows these geometric symbols to build up to the ordinary world of particles and forces that we see around us. That's our program, is to model physics with a quasi-crystal code made of the simplest bit.
Aware enough of myself? Have I taken enough factors into consideration? Have I done all that should be done? And then he started trembling. This is the fall of man, of course. What it meant. The Lao Tzu says, when the great Tao lost, there came duty to man and right conduct. In other words, nobody talks about how he ought to behave unless things have gone radically wrong. There wouldn't be any conception of faithful ministers of the state unless there were a lot of lousy politicians around. No one would talk about filial piety unless there were wayward sons and daughters. So there is constantly in the tradition of Taoism the idea that all moral preaching is confusion. There's a marvelous case of this in the Zhuangzi book, where there's an alleged conversation between Confucius and Lao Tzu, in which Lao Tzu asked Confucius to explain to him what is charity and duty to one's neighbor. And Confucius gives him a little instruction, being giving up one's self-interest and working for others.
about is success in becoming virtuous, or enlightened, or integrated, or non-neurotic, or self-actualized. Let's use all the terms that are being used. All this talk attests to the fact that it hasn't happened, and will in fact get in the way of its happening. Well, to go back to Lietze, who succeeded in riding the wind, what happened? Lietze found a very great master and went to study with him. And the master...
Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
It's the ultimate source of satisfaction within ourselves. If you do wrong things, mainly harming others, you get negative consequences. If you do helping others, bring more happiness to others, you get benefit. More inner strength there, and more sort of confidence of purpose of life, and fulfillment about that purpose, then you always feel happy. When we are young, very much sort of alive, these inner value. And we grown up, particularly the society where not much talking about these values. Only talks, when we read newspaper or television, sports, or money, a number of dollars, like that. And all the advertising, some because of the material values. No one telling, no one sort of explaining the importance of warm-heartedness.
Despite this, he says there is a lot to be happy about if we only look in the right places.
Early part of 20th century, later part of 20th century, much positive change took place. I think world, yes, there is a lot of crisis, a lot of bad things, but also is a lot of good things.
And yet, we have been taught to fear anyone and everyone, a reality, he says, that is impacting one of the fundamentals of human happiness.
So, we are social animals. Therefore, friendship is very essential. friendship comes trust. Fear and trust go contradiction. More fear there cannot develop trust. With fear, how can develop friendship?
It's little wonder then that loneliness has become the number one cause of depression in the West.
And a big city, a lot of people, but just think oneself, self-centered attitude, and no idea or sense of love. Then, too much competitive sense, then jealousy. Jealousy brings distrust. Distrust brings frustration. So therefore, and fear. Then the lonely feeling automatically comes. So lonely feeling is not creation of environment, but creation of your own mental attitude.
But the thought leader says there is hope if only we could seek a slightly different goal.
I think eventually we can develop more deeper experience about our life.
Astounding coincidence. Things coming from all different directions you never expected. Attract resources, individual timing, knowledge, equipment that will then place you in a moment where that thing that you have said you desire is one of the options that we can act upon with integrity. This, in a nutshell, is trusting your kindness. And each time that you do not take this approach, you are trusting that there is no kindness, that you do not get what you want, and therefore you get the evidence or the effect of there being no seeming intelligence or kindness, and that you do not get what you want, except once in a while when you get it. But understand, you can experience what I am saying, and obviously, seeing what's right in front of your face, concentrating your attention in what's right there, choosing with your excitement the most exciting, acting upon it with evidence is no big deal at all. It is simple, it is fun, it is effortless. Acting upon the things that excite you with integrity takes no effort. It produces no struggle. Therefore, if it is available, now's the time. As we say, go for it. If it is not, you still get what you want. Allow that to roll around so many times. Allow this approach to be sampled by you if you so desire. Obviously, the way that you create your own reality right now is flawless for your reality. Go into experience it. However, perhaps the idea of consciously creating your life, of creating according to preference, I don't know, maybe. But what we have found in our society, what we have found from our experience, is that we will settle for nothing less. And the mechanism is flawless. When you follow your excitement with integrity in the moment, what's available right here, right now. You begin to create new effects as you act upon something that excites you. There is a result. That result puts a new thing into the option that wouldn't have been there before. And so something that excites you in this moment, so it may seem to have nothing to do with the most exciting thing, is by definition a stepping stone that literally creates the next goal. Everything is related. One integrated whole. This is your reality. This is one option. When you do so, you begin to experience your life with effortlessness. You begin to experience what you call ecstasy. Everything is an effortless, conscious creation.
And you're not under compulsion all the time. You know, when I was a little boy and went to school in England, I had to learn the piano. They called it playing the piano. But actually, they said you must play. We had in England compulsory games. They used to post notices on the bulletin board in the school where I went to, which said, this afternoon everyone will go for a run. And if you didn't go for a run, and it was found out that you hadn't, you were flogged. So everybody hated going for a run, because they were under compulsion to play. Everybody must play. It's like the whole game of life we're all involved in. It's only a game, but everybody has got to belong. So we went running. I remember one day I was out on a run, and I was trying to enjoy myself because I was running on the balls of my feet, dancing along. And a fellow came up behind me who was running on his heels. He was jogging. And he was going clump, 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 clump. I said to him, what's the matter with you? You're running on your heels. And you're jarring your whole body all the way through. Okay, but he stuck to it, and he became the champion long-distance runner of the school. But he didn't enjoy it. It was work. And all he enjoyed was the suffering that he endured that made him feel that he had really contributed to the human race because he suffered so much. He identified his existence and his worth with his suffering. Now, really great runners dance when they run. They don't necessarily follow a straight course. They may weave. And in the same way, if you happen to witness in the year 1970 the World Cup Championship in soccer, you would have seen that the winning team from Brazil played soccer in a most extraordinary way. They played it like basketball. They played it dancing. The way we learned soccer in school when I was a boy was very, very formal and orderly, and we didn't really enjoy it. But these fellows were bouncing balls off their shoulders, off every muscle, and they had astonishing teamwork. But at the same time, were dancing the game, and the sports writer in the London Times said that they danced their way to victory. So the point is, therefore, that you can do everything you have to do in this spirit. Don't make a distinction between work and play. Regard everything that you're doing as play, and don't imagine for 1 minute that you've got to be serious about it. Let's take, for example, the rest of the world other than ourselves. Think for a moment, what are vegetables doing? Let's, for example, consider this. And what's it all about? I mean, it serves us
chemical compounds, including the proteins necessary for life, DNA. Single-celled organisms emerge eventually in the biosphere, and then groups of single-celled organisms, each specializing in a different function, like workers in a big city, team up to form larger structures, such as animals. Eventually, some animal comes along that is so exquisitely good at choosing and assessing meaning and being creative that we label that animal as being conscious, such as a human being. So now this mysterious notion of consciousness is admitted to be real and clearly emerges from the laws of physics, is allowed by the laws of physics. Then we can ask, well, is this the end of the road? Is human consciousness the epitome of self-organization in this universe? Or does it go beyond? And just as single-celled organisms team up in the human body to allow high-level human consciousness to emerge and float upon an ocean of their existence, is it possible?
And how we today are bamboozled by these obstacles. In the history of Western civilization, there have really been, in the past 2,000 years, two dominant mythologies. One has had a long run and the other has had a fairly short run. But they are both ways of terrifying you so that you won't see the point. But at the same time, they are perhaps not merely negative things, but challenges, barriers of the same kind that a guru would offer. For example, in the study of Zen, each koan is referred to as a barrier. And if you can pass the barrier, you see, you get in. But the function of the teacher is to put the barriers up to see how you'll react to them. So, in a way, we could say that the two great mythologies which have dominated the Western world in the past 2,000 years are two barriers. The first, of course, is the Christian mythology. And in the Christian mythology, the individual is made to feel that he is strictly on probation, that he does not really belong, that if he is at all a son of God, he is so by adoption and grace. He isn't really one of the family. Let me explore the theology of that a moment. In Christian theology, God has only one Son. The monogenes, or the only begotten Son of God, who is the second person of the Trinity, the Logos, the divine idea of itself. The Trinity constitutes a family. And naturally, it's therefore threefold, because all, for the Greek mind, and it was the Greek mind that molded Christian theology, meaning entirely depends on the structure of the Greek language. And Greek, in common with all Western languages, and indeed also Sanskrit, from which it is derived, has a sentence structure in which there is the subject, the verb, and the predicate. And we can't make any sense without those three things. We have to have an I love you or an I know you sentence for there to be any love or for there to be any knowledge. There must be the lover. The lover can't love without having a beloved, and the lover doesn't relate to the beloved without the relationship of love between them. So there you have the subject, the predicate, and the verb. And so naturally, in Greek ideas, the very inner nature of reality of the Godhead itself must be threefold, following the structure of Greek thought and Greek grammar. So, in this way, the inner life of the Godhead is completely self-sufficient. there is the sun, the object of God's love, so that God doesn't need any.
So when the matrix element is 1, when I combine 1 with 2, I have, this is the matrix element, which is the 1, 2 matrix element, which is phi 1 times phi 2. Here I have phi 1, phi 3, because the matrix entry is the 1, 3 matrix entry, you know. Here I have 2, 1, because it's the matrix entry is the 2, 1 matrix entry. Here I have 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2. And here, when I have phi 1, I have phi square. This is the matrix element, the 2, 2 matrix element is, so I get this. This is the 3, 3 matrix element, so this is what I get. And finally, I have this combination here. This is the most subtle term. Remember when you take vector products? Remember when you took the vector product? Remember when you take the vector product of remember when you study vector analysis, vector calculus, you have the scalar product of two vectors compared to the vector product of, you know. So when you have, this is only, by the way, this is in your book. Yeah, this is in the book. This is in the book. Yeah. So imagine you take the, I guess I can write here. Let me see. Remember, when you take vector number 1, vector number 2, remember you take the epsilon symbol. Remember 1, 2, 3. This is the cross product. You know. Remember this is when you take the cross product of vectors. Remember A cross B gives you a vector, right? So by the epsilon symbol, remember what it meant is the yes, the permutation symbol, the epsilon. Remember when the permutation is even, it's a +1. When the permutation is odd, it's -1. And when the entries are repeated, you get a 0. Okay? So 1, 2, 3 is a positive permutation, it's an even permutation. So you get a +1. So this is why you get a 3 here. And we know that, you know, when you take the cross product of this unit vector with this vector here, you generate this vector. Remember when you use the thumb rule of vectors? So when you take the cross product of the vector along the x-axis with the unit vector along the y-axis, you generate the vector, the rule of thumb, remember? So this is why you're going to end up having this term here. You know, this is what it means. I have vector number 1 with vector number 2. The cross product is going to give me vector number 3. And this is why you get this phi 3. Here, for example, okay, you're going to have vector number 1 with vector number 3 is going to give you vector number 2. For example, when you have 2 cross E3, okay, you're going to have 2, 3, 1. No, here's, I'm sorry, it's actually 1 because I am in the first row. I'm sorry. Okay. And then you have,
and the result can only be a result that is within integrity, therefore not harming you or anyone else. Now you already live by placing trust in whatever your criteria or barometer is at this point. So in a sense, you already do this. But in general, rather than doing so utilizing your excitement, which is uniquely your own vibration, most often, due to societal tendencies and the spoon feeding, as you are growing up of societal belief systems, you will align yourself rather than to the excitement, to the idea, which perhaps we will call, everyone knows you should do this or that. You align yourself to what others say you should be doing, rather than what you know in your heart is an expression of who you are. You are not being someone else. you are interacting with the reflection you call someone else, but are choosing to be the point of view that you are. And therefore only you can truly know what is, in that sense, exciting and within integrity for you. When you begin to function again in this way, you replace the results that you already get by following what everyone says you should or should not do. The results that many of you have in your life at this point are the results of conforming to the everyone knows reality, rather than checking in with your own internal understanding, your own internal message system, and beginning to react and respond from that perspective, which is your total self-empowerment. For the reason that something distinctly excites you and perhaps no one else around you is that that is your signature, your particular signal that that thing is most you, not most them. They perhaps will benefit paradoxically by watching you actually do that thing that they are not excited about. For they have attracted you to their reality, and they can glean positive meaning from anything that they attract into their presence, into their experience. But this will far more directly, positively affect you, for you are now being consciously, by choice, demanding to be the person you chose to be from your own criteria, your own heart, following your own excitement, your own passion, the things that give you joy. And once again, only can you truly know this. Therefore, we introduce to you the idea of factoring into what you generally refer to as your spiritual growth, your excitement. And we do so as a gift. For in general, many of the spiritual orientations upon your planet are strongly steeped in denial of the physical self, as though the only way that one could express spirituality is to deny the results of the very choices that you have made to be in this life, to create this life. Understand, though, that you have chosen to create this life. Make no bones about it. And therefore, you have chosen to experience or
something that comes with being present as a natural result of being present. Become less attached to outcomes, to achievements, to things, even to people. Love is a loving, ultra loving kindness. sense the transcendent dimension of who you are, so you cannot sense yourself as present. You will do your best to practice not to change what is almost
access to your creatorhood. When you spend your now moment recreating a non-preferred past, projecting a non-preferred future, you in general do so at the cost of what is right in front of your face. Right now in front of your face. And if you are willing to ground yourself back into the now moment, the form that takes is when something comes up, asking yourself, well, right now is the only time I ever exist. Right now is the only time I can ever act from. The thing that I am looking at right now, is it something I can do something about right now? If the answer is yes, go right ahead. If the answer is no, then it is a distraction. Then, because you cannot act upon it and are placing attention upon it, you are looking at it at the cost of what is right there. So if you ask yourself this question and the answer is no, I cannot do anything about it, push that aside. Then look at what is right here, right now. That is how you reground yourself into the moment in any given moment with that simple question. For you can only act on certain options in a given moment in the way that you lay down the succession, in that sense, so to speak, of now moments. And therefore, should you place your attention and concentrate on what you can act upon, there will always be a relevant set of choices. And from those choices, there will always be something which excites you, which gives you more passion, more desire than the others. And if you are willing from what is available, not from what is not, from what is available in any given moment, to use that barometer within you of your excitement, of your gravitation toward, of your passion for, as a criteria to choose from what is available, you will then always express the choice that is directly indicative of the choice of, perhaps you can say, your higher self, or the choice that is representative of what is most you in this life. For excitement itself is the vibratory energy that tells you what is most you. That is why it excites you and nobody else. It is the sign that many of you have been asking for. Oh, I need a sign. The sign is your excitement. Many times something very exciting comes along and you say, not right now, I'm looking for my sign. But that is your sign. That is why you feel that way. Uniquely, you feel that way. Therefore, your point of power can always be acted upon in a positive way. By providing at least one positive alternative, by recreating the referential, preferential you to do so. This is always immediately available. And though at first it may seem as a series of steps, your willingness to even approach it in this way in and of itself is an action and a statement to the universe. And will then reorient your entire reality toward that preference.
I think reduce ill feeling towards others, and also reduce this sort of distrust. I always I never consider myself as something special. If I consider myself something different from you, like I'm Buddhist, even more I'm His Holiness Dalai Lama, or even if you consider I'm Nobel laureate, then actually you create yourself as a prisoner. I forget these things. I simply consider I'm one of the 7 billion human beings. We are mentally, emotionally, intellectually, we are same.
A point he rather inadvertently proved through an unexpected story about gas.
When in aeroplane, sometimes this gas problem comes, then you see, difficult to let out. So occasionally, you see, look around, then like that. It's an ultimate source of satisfaction within ourselves. If you do wrong things, mainly harming others, you get negative consequences. If you do helping others, bring more happiness to others, you get benefit. More inner strength there, and more sort of confidence of purpose of life and fulfillment about that purpose, then you always feel happy. When we are young, very much sort of alive, these inner value. And we grown up, particularly the society where not much talking about these values. Only talks, when we read newspaper or television, sports, or money, the number of $, like that. And all the appetizing, some because of the material values. No one telling, no one sort of explaining the importance of warm-heartedness.
Despite this, he says there is a lot to be happy about if we only look in the right places.
Early part of 20th century, later part of 20th century, much positive change took place. I think world, yes, there is a lot of crisis, a lot of bad things, but also is a lot of good things.
And yet, we have been taught to fear anyone and everyone, a reality, he says, that is impacting one of the fundamentals of human happiness.
So, we are social animals. Therefore, friendship is very essential. Friendship comes trust. Fear and trust go contradiction.
You can see at left a lovely snow has happened in this mountainous region. To the right you can see the mountainous region without snow. These are in fact the Rocky Mountains in the United States in the vicinity of Denver, Colorado. Here is part of the St. Lawrence Seaway in Canada, and you can see great floating blocks of ice breaking up. This is one of many pictures that would indicate the presence not just in oceans, but inland of liquid water. Here is a beautiful picture of ice-choked, sinuous rivers in the Arctic. And this picture, as many others, show the Earth to be extraordinarily beautiful. And I think long after our scientists got totally bored with the Earth, our artists would continue to be interested in it. Here now is a close-up picture of a particular river. You may see two numbers, a 5 and a 6 on the Earth. They have not actually been written on the Earth. That's just been put on for another reason. We should ignore that. If we saw a large 5 on the surface of the Earth, that would suggest that there was life on the planet, of course, especially if we used Arabic numerals. But what we see is this sinuous, tributaried, wandering feature, which is a characteristic feature of flowing liquids. And we can also look at the mouth of this river, the Colorado River. The mouth is up here at the center. And follow, yes, here's the mouth of the river. And we can follow the entire course of the river. By the way, in this picture, there is, right within the box here, a sort of corkscrew on the ground. some miles long. And it looks very strange and perhaps artificial. We might think that perhaps that was produced by intelligent beings. Turns out, not in the least. That's an old stream valley. Here now is a photograph of the east coast of the United States at kilometer resolution. And if you look closely at, say, New York City over here, or at Washington, D.C. over here, you find no sign of life, intelligent or otherwise, at kilometer resolution. You do find that the cities are discolored. The places where there are cities turn out from orbit to be dirty. But it would be a very intelligent extraterrestrial who would deduce that wherever there's dirt, there's intelligent life. And apart from the fact that cities are generally dirty, there's no indication of the existence of cities, much less their inhabitants, at this resolution scale. Now, here's a picture which clearly shows the presence of life, if only we were wise enough to recognize it. Because each of these peculiar Pacific islands is a coral atoll, is a product of life. That one, say, or that one, or this one over here. They are produced by colonial organisms, coral, hordes of animals all working together to make a coral island. But unless we know beforehand about life on Earth, it would not be apparent that that's the case. So here's a sign of life, but we wouldn't recognize it. Now here is the Salton Sea.
You cannot really conceive space at all. Look at the wonder a child has when it asks questions and begins. What's up there? What's beyond? What's after that? What's after that? The child is absolutely fascinated by thinking about that. Do you know all children are fascinated with infinity? Don't you remember seeing, say, a child's book? And on the cover of this book is a little girl sitting, reading the same book, with the same little girl on the cover, and so naturally there's another little girl on the cover of the book she's looking at in the picture. And so the child begins to wonder, how small can it get? How far can it go? Or they get in opposing mirrors and look. And gee, that's wonderful. Why can't you line them up so that it doesn't just disappear around the corner always? Couldn't you get in straight on this? Seems so difficult. Mummy, what did God do before he started the world? You think back. What would it be like to be in heaven and live forever and ever and ever and ever? And immediately this somehow stretches the skull. And children love doing this because children are always trying out experiments on themselves. You know, they prod themselves, pull themselves. They love to spin in circles and make themselves feel dizzy. Because that's a great thing, you know, that feeling. They're going like this, you see. They're always fascinated with the limits of experience. So what's out beyond that? Of course, now when a sophisticated astronomer tries to tell you that space is finite, we resent this and say, all right, space is finite, but what's outside it? Well, the astronomer says, you see, you can only talk about an outside, inside space. Outside space, there is no outside. You see, the mind won't take it. The sense, you see, of infinity. So, this space fascinates us, going on forever. Expanding. It seems to be actually going on forever, you see, if the universe is a huge explosion. But you can see, can't you, I think this. Space, although you cannot pin it down, and it has the quality of infinity, there's no way of talking about space, because it has no color. It has no weight. You can't cut it. You can't possibly chop it into pieces. And yet, at the same time, you cannot differentiate it from solids. We come to another important point here, you see. That solid and space are in a secret conspiracy with each other.
Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Question, is reality random or is it deterministic? And interestingly enough, free will and the very notion of consciousness comes into play here, because if everything is a pre-written script, an algorithm deterministically playing itself out, well then in a sense you don't really have free will, you just think you do. But if reality is deeply non-deterministic, well then there may be an opportunity in there for you to really think that you do have free will. So, we are soon to publish a paper called the Code Theoretic Axiom, the third ontology. And so it offers a third choice to argue about. And that is the idea that reality is not a deterministic algorithm playing itself out, and it is also not a purely random system. That instead, it is a language in action. And the thing about languages is you can never predict with certainty what is going to happen with a language. For example, if I say the dog ran blank, you know that I cannot say the dog ran cat, because if you understand the rules of the language, you would know that that's not legal. So you could with certainty say that I will not break that rule, but you cannot with certainty predict that I am going to say fast. I might say quickly. Okay, so human languages, computer languages, bird languages, they generally have symbols which are arbitrary, right? So we invent the letter K in English to represent the phonetic sound of K. Now, there's a special set of symbols and a special type of language which is not so arbitrary. Let us start with the idea of what a language is. A language is simply a set of symbols and rules on how you can arrange the symbols, and most importantly, freedom, called syntax, that allows you to not be forced by the rules to have an exact predetermined way that you can order things. Now, let's decompose the word symbol. What is a symbol? A symbol is an object And by the way, an object in set theory is simply a thing which you can think of, such as an economy, humor, a brick, a letter, a number. So an object is anything which can be thought of. So a symbol is one object that represents another object. That's a symbol. And a language is a set of symbols that have rules on how you can order them, plus freedom within the rules, so that you can creatively express information. So there's this special type of language made of a special type of symbol, and these are called self-referential symbols. For example, in physics, we have this symbol, which is a triangle, which represents the idea of change. The delta symbol represents this notion, the more simple approach, this more straightforward approach that many people are taking nowadays, which is that reality is made of information. So, what is information? Well, information can be described as meaning. We're going to have to explain what that means, but it can be described as meaning conveyed by symbolism, right? So if you have some physical system in a dimensional space, like the volume and the behavior of a hydrogen atom, a lot of that is geometric information. There's the waveform in the electromagnetic spectrum. There's the waveform of the probability plot from quantum mechanics, which is an elliptical form. And then there's the volume of it. There's everything about physics is geometric in one way or another. So then we can conjecture that the meaning of this information is the physical structure itself. In other words, what is the meaning of a square? Well, one can say, well, the meaning of a square has to do with the fact that if it's a unit length square with edges 1, then its body diagonal is the square root of 2, and it has 90-degree angles. And we can use a square itself as an abstract symbol to represent a square. And because you can use geometric symbols to begin constructing a higher dimensional reality, for example, you can use squares to construct cubes, right? And that's a higher dimensional thing than a square. So our approach is to suppose that perhaps reality itself is this dynamical mosaic-like code, this three-dimensional quasi-crystal that describes waveform and particle information and describes change and time-related ideas and spatial-related ideas. A simulation is really the idea of taking a code and using that symbolism, that informational symbolism, to model or describe something else. And if you use geometric symbols in a geometric language to simulate a geometric object, then in a sense, you have this idea where the hardware, the software, and the simulation output are all one and the same. As my friend and scientific colleague here, Ray Aschheim, says. So hopefully you have already realized that there's an interesting problem here. If meaning in language and symbolism always relates to a chooser selecting the symbols, whether that be a bird language or a computer code, then you might be wondering, well, how can reality at the smallest scale be a language? Who would recognize the meaning of the symbols? Who would choose the syntactical freedom in the language? And so that's an interesting problem.
A Lie algebra is nothing but a vector space endowed with a Lie bracket. That's what it is. In very simple words. Yeah, Fang, you were saying.
AX plus BX and then Z on the right side, you have the z times a times z.
Here you see, remember, A and B are elements of your field, of your real numbers. And your generators of your algebra are x, y, and z. X, y, and z are your generators of your algebra. So here I have x commutator with z, x with z. Here I have y with z, y with z. Okay? And I can pull out A and B. I can pull them out because they are elements, they are real numbers or complex numbers. They are not elements of your algebra. Remember, the bracket is defined with respect to your elements of your algebra. The A are like constants.
Yeah, but the A is not in front of Z though.
The
you take the A out of the X, Z, that means you...
yeah, but remember, you have AX here. Can I write it here? Yes. What happens is that, remember, A is a constant. Imagine X is a matrix. And I want to take the commutator with another matrix. Okay? So what do I have? I have, by definition, a constant x times z minus z ax. Okay? And remember, because a is a constant, you can pull it out. Okay? Yeah.
Question about not the algebra, but the field. Can the multiplication in the field be non-commutative?
Well, that's tricky because in that case you have to be careful with how you pull out the A, because you're right. Here you're right. It acts to your left. Well, you're right. If you can keep track, if the A acts to your left, you can pull it to your left. You're right. Here the A and B appear on your right, so in reality you should have the A on the right hand side.
So you're thinking quaternions, right?
Yeah, but the quaternions, well, it's a division algebra. It's non-commutative. It's a division algebra.
Yes, but the definition of the field is not very...
It's tricky. For me, the quaternions is a division algebra, but is it a field? Yeah, I guess you can say it's a field. Yeah.
Because, yes, in French we have the notion of commutative field or non-commutative field.
Yes.
In English, is the field necessarily commutative or not?
Yeah. But
I don't think so, right? Field can be anything. It doesn't have to be.
You're right. I think quaternions, yes. The only thing you have to be careful when you multiply things by the left or on the right.
Yes.
Okay? Here, remember, here the A appears on the right-hand side. So in reality, you should have the A appear on the right-hand side and the B on the right-hand side. Remember, because you have to be careful with the order. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, now the Jacobi identity. Okay. Forget for a moment on the Jacobi identity and let's look at this equation below. The Jacobi identity, remember, I wrote earlier that you have to have a Lie bracket. That Lie bracket has to obey the Jacobi identity. Now you may ask, where does the Jacobi identity come from? It's really what you call a derivation property. Remember when you take the derivative of a function, and then you take the derivative of a product of two functions?
Developing cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
reflect what is happening right now. Understand that although things or events sequentially from a set of steps from a past may lead to a present or now moment, that is where the relationship ends. There is no causal, in that sense, relationship. In the present from the past, there is no effect that the past can have on the present until you say or you determine that it does. So in that now moment, you then create the effect from a quote-unquote seeming past, but you create it right here, right now. So therefore, yes, you feel the effect seemingly of a past, but it is not from the past itself having a hold on you. It is from your interpretation in the moment, your attitude in the moment, and ultimately your actions in the moment. If those actions reflect a high degree of belief that the past does, in that sense, affect the present, then you create an effect that seems to provide evidence that seems to continuously provide a rationale that the past does affect the present. But that is merely something that you do in the now moment. Therefore, the now moment is always your point of power. For since you always ever exist in the now, it is always eternally right now. You can always change your reality right now. For there is no other time. When you are willing to begin to look at that, you are not remembering a past that is quote-unquote distant, but recreating the past from the present right now. You understand that right now is all that matters. Right now is the point at which you make any determination or relation to a past story. So right now is the time that you can change that life. Your physical manifestation of your reality results generally from three steps. Number one, in a given now moment from a given second, you have interpretation. In general, you will ascribe a positive or negative interpretation to a particular given situation. Now understand the situation in and of itself is a blank set of props with no built-in meaning. You assign the meaning, and if it is something that is generally societally labeled bad, and you then buy into that and automatically label it negative, then you cannot help in that sense but get a negative effect from that neutral symbol. But the opposite is also true. It is always your choice in any given now moment to remember that the symbol that the event has really no built-in meaning until you...
So much I could eat you. And that's what the plant feels in growing. It doesn't feel that it must grow. It's not under orders. It's not a military chain of command. It does this spontaneously. So that when you try to command a spontaneous process, you stop it. It's like saying to someone, now, be unself-conscious. You know, there's a belief in India that if you think of a monkey while you're taking medicine, the medicine won't work. So therefore, when you take your vitamins or next pills, try not to think of a monkey. See? And that will completely tie up the spontaneous process, and it won't work. So all the things that we say to our children, like, well, you must have a bowel movement every day after breakfast. Try, darling, to go to sleep. Stop pouting. Take that look off your face. Oh, you're blushing. And make you feel guilty about blushing. See? All those things are attempts to say this one thing. Darling, little child, you are required to do what will be acceptable only if you do it voluntarily. And everybody on this account is completely mixed up. Because we are trying to force genuine behavior. We all admire artists when we say they're unself-conscious. They seem so natural. They seem to dance or paint or talk or play the piano so effortlessly. Of course, a lot of work has gone into it. But if you are a great artist, your so-called periods of practice, when you sit for hours and study your technique on the piano, you will not do that effectively unless it is a pleasure for you. You have to come to the point where going over it again and again is a dance. One of my friends is a great Hindu musician who has the most extraordinary technique in playing an instrument called the sarod. It's like an extremely sophisticated Hindu guitar. His name is Ali Akbar Khan, and he's generally acknowledged to be the leading master of Northern Indian music. He told me once that the comprehension of music is in understanding one note. The meaning of that is he can sit for hours and hours working on this, but there really is only one note at a time. And he gets into that note and listens. He really listens. Gets into the sound. And it simply doesn't matter that it takes a long time, that he have to do this for many hours, because he's completely absorbed in listening to the sound he is now making. He's going with that vibration, as when you might chant, you see, like they do in yoga. Or
virtue, as we understand it today, isn't at all appropriate. The nearest kind of, when we speak of the healing virtues of a plant, that's nearer to the meaning of this word, dirt. The Japanese pronounce it toku, the Cantonese duck, and the Northern Mandarins approximately dirt. And in the section of the Lao-tzu where this is really introduced, the text says something like this: superior virtue some of the people in the river are swimming against it, but they're still being carried along. Others have learned that the art of the thing is to swim with it, and they're carried along too. But they know it, you see. They know they're carried along, whereas the people who are swimming against it think they're going in the opposite.
You see? And you can make a calculus of energy like you make a calculus of wiggles in the world, and you can say there are various waves or wavicles or particles of energy which we give all sorts of different names to. But the more we pursue it, the more it all seems to disappear. Like space. The more you try to think what it is, the more difficult it is. So in the same way, the more you try to say, now come on, let's sit down, what is this here? It's all right if you stop at a certain point. Then you say, well, now we know, that's practical. So let's not ask any more questions. Somebody, shut up. See? But if you keep on asking questions, everything falls apart. You notice this in the scholarly world. Scholars spend far more time debunking than they do creating. Because everything that has ever happened has been debunked, practically. You can show that there is no evidence. You know that Julius Caesar existed, not really. Certainly there's no evidence that Jesus existed, that Socrates existed. There's a great deal of doubt about Plato. Probably the Emperor Ashoka was a myth, and so on. You know, you can go on in that indefinitely. Finding out that there really is no evidence. I don't know, probably the same sort of thing is happening with the Warren Commission. I don't know. Or that it's something that it didn't happen anyway. Because that is the work of the analytical intellect, you see. When you finally try to be God, that's to say, define it exactly. Now, just where is it? And let's get perfectly clear so it's fixed, see? And it all becomes slippery. Because in order to handle the world, you see, you have to touch it rather gently. You mustn't try to pin things down. As they say in Zen, you do not try to drive a nail into the sky. Because that's the beauty of space, you see. There's nothing in it to hang on. It hasn't a hook to put your hat on, you know, somewhere in space. And yet, it hasn't got a floor to fall onto. See, if space had a concrete floor on the bottom, it'd be pretty dangerous stuff. But it doesn't. There's nowhere in space to collide with space. You can run into somebody or something else, yes, but not with space. Figure then on this. Work on this hypothesis, you see. It's only a hypothesis at the moment, nothing more. That space is you. Because you are equally inaccessible to inspection. When you look to find out who you are, somebody like a Zen master will interrupt you and say, excuse me, but who is it that wants to know? And who is it that's looking? Find out that. So you know you're chasing your own tail like a little dog. And you never catch up with it.
Suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
So long it works, okay, very good. But not very sound. But the value means, humanism, basic humankind, human nature, I believe, gentleness. I think when we are very young, maybe more fresh, basic human nature. So they love play. Occasionally some quarrel. But most cases, the parent, particularly the mother, provides affection, compassion. The children themselves doesn't care what the children's sort of social background or their family background. So long the children play together, showing affection. I think that these are the real human, express or very, very alive, basic human nature. Logically, we are social animal. So individuals' sort of happy life or successful life entirely depend on the rest of the community. So the rest of the community is source of our future, source of one individual's sort of, success or happiness. So we have to take, like farmer, take farmland, maximum care. Not love the soil, but that is their future. Their income, money come from that soil. So similarly, individual happy life depend on other. So the others are basis or source of our fortune. So it's taking care of them. It's a more natural sort of way. I think artificial sort of thinking, I'm independent. I never depend on them. Then exploit, cheating, lying, bully. In reality, long run, you are cutting or destroying basis of your own future. So humanism, basic human nature is more gentleness. Gentleness not come from dullness. gentleness comes from full alerted mind, sharp mind, but more balanced with warm-heartedness. Then real human gentleness comes. So these not come from God or not come from sky or above, but come from within. So that's humanism. Well, I think some sort of consider success or happiness. So we have to take, like farmer, take sort of farmland because of maximum care. Not love the soil, but that is their future. Their income, money come from that soil. So similarly, individual happy life depend on other. So that others are basis or source of our fortune. So it's taking care of them. It's a more natural sort of way. I think artificial sort of thinking, I'm independent. I never depend on them. They're exploit, cheating, lying, bullying. Reality, long run, or cutting, or destroying, basis of our future. So humanism, basic human nature is more gentleness. Gentleness not come from dullness. Gentleness come from full alerted mind, sharp mind, more balanced with warm-heartedness. Then real human gentleness comes. So these not come from God or not come from sky or above, but come from within. So that's humanism. Well, I think some sort of, because of the some way to look, that's it. Humanism. We are social animal. It is bound to happen. Different views, different sort of interest. But still, these different people who have different sort of idea, different sort of interest, they are part of the humanity, part of the society. So there's no reason to killing each other, to bully each other. Even there is some differences, we have to talk. So that's the principle of non-violence. Non-violence does not mean non-violence, you should consider non-violence is signs of strength. Violence is a sign of desperate weakness. So there is very rich human thinking, the concept of ahimsa. Not only remain idea, but 1,000 years into practice. So non-violence is very, very reasonable. And especially in ancient time, okay, people, different continent, different country, they remain more or less self-sufficient. So not much contact with outside. So according to their circumstances, the very concept of war destroy the other group which have different interests or different sort of views. Then destruction of your enemy is victory of yourself. Now today's reality is every nation, every continent very much against each other, heavily interdependent. Arab needs Western technology. Western country needs Arab oil. like that. Everything interdependent. So, according to that reality, constant war is outdated. Yet, difference of interest, contradictory interest, always there, because of human vision, human desire. Then we must find effective, practical method to solve these things. That's done with non-violent principle. So that's that much done.
Everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Don't try to make sense. Just listen to the sound of the voice. And I ask you, listening to what is, can you hear anything pass?
or anything future. Can you hear yourself as a listener? It's amazing how many things there are that aren't so. And just for a moment, also be aware of your breath. Are you doing it, or is it happening to you? Or both? Or neither? Listen and feel the breath as it wants to go, as your ears want to respond to the waves. And don't be uptight about coughing or shifting your position or, doing whatever nature wants you to do. It's all part of the symphony. Just listen. Ears only and breath only. This is your method of testing out what reality is. You're a baby. You have no ideas. Nobody's ever told you anything. There are no theories about the universe, and if you're anxious about that, you've checked your theories at the door. You can pick them up when you go out. Just feel it. I think I've got you into the state of meditation. At least that's the way it feels. Now remember, in this state, we are not looking for any result. Nothing at all to be accomplished in the future. We are simply experiencing what is, now, here. And we are abandoning the project, momentarily, of forming any concepts about it. Don't ask who is watching, because that's a really grammatical question, because the verb has to have a subject according to the conventions of our language. There is a watching. Feel it like that. This is called tathata in Sanskrit. Tathata. experiencing is what I'm trying to tell you. And I want you to now to return to your state of normal restlessness. And if any of you in this company has questions to ask, I'd be very happy to try and answer them to the best of my ability. Yes. Well, I feel that he cheated. You see, he was what is called a Mauni, practicing silent yoga, but yet he always used to talk on a letter board. And if you're going to be a true Mauni, you have to stop writing also, and be absolutely in silence. It's a very difficult exercise, and I don't recommend that anybody do it for much more than a month. To go on doing it for ever so many years is really a rather egocentric performance. You know, I'm so different from everybody else. And one should never overdo yogic practices. They are, all yogic practices, meditation practices, are wrong if they are not fun. And true meditation should be an absolute delight. An absolute delight. Delight, the light. Yes. Astral projection. Well, this is astral projection is not important. It's astral projection is a new form of jet propulsion. Yes. Yes.
Is not like that of, say, the second law of thermodynamics, but like that of the Mozart sonatas or the arabesques on a Persian rug. The significance of useful knowledge, like the second law of thermodynamics, is precisely that by applying it, human beings may be enabled to go on experiencing such things as music or love or mystical insight. But what could I say to the woman who, under anesthetic, had once had this experience and wanted it again more than anything else in the world? Go and have another operation? Get yourself some ether, or mescaline, or lysergic acid, or take up yoga, or get thee to a nunnery? There are still other, and much too pat, answers to this question, as that she is failing to revive the experience by the very act of seeking for it. As well tell a starving man that his very hunger is what prevents him from finding food. For once a person has had an experience of this kind, he is gone. It's easier to get rid of an addiction to heroin, or to choose something more natural, to get rid of the love of the opposite sex. No, I could better say something like this. The answer is in the very experience which you have had. didn't you know then, for certain, with utter clarity, that your whole life, past, present, and future, was somehow, as you yourself put it, part and parcel of that universal harmony which the Chinese call the Tao? I feel sometimes that phrases like universal harmony are so hackneyed, so almost slushy and sentimental, that it's terribly difficult to begin to find the right word for this kind of thing without sounding like Voltaire's Mr. Pangloss, without sort of jumping on this best of all possible worlds business, because the thing isn't like that at all. It's very, very much stronger than the feeling that this is the best of all possible worlds. And the curious thing about it, it isn't that it glosses over anything, but it makes the most awful things seem that way too, without at the same time making them cease to seem terrible. It's very peculiar. Well, she had seen then, for certain, at the time of that experience, seen with total clarity, that her whole past, present, and future life was in some way part and parcel of what we are perforce driven to call the universal harmony of the Tao. But what one doesn't seem to understand then is that this still remains true of what one is today. You are in the stream when seeking for what you have lost, and when feeling perfectly ordinary, no less than when you were in ecstasy. You're not feeling the experience, and you're striving to regain it, is, as a matter of fact, the very future which you saw to be in such perfect accord with the process. Let me remind you of a celebrated tale that was told by Sri Ramakrishna. The story of one of his disciples who had learned from the Master that all the multiplicity of this world is the illusory outward form of the one eternal divine Brahman underlying the entire process. And having sat and listened to this exposition, the disciple got up and went his way, and in passing down a rather narrow street, he saw an elephant coming towards him, and Mahout riding on top of the elephant. Well, the Mahout saw the disciple wandering down the center of the road and shouted at him, "Hey you, get out of the way! This elephant isn't very nice." But the disciple thought, now the Master Ramakrishna has told me that I am Brahman, and that everything is Brahman, and therefore the elephant is Brahman, and therefore it will be perfectly all right if I walk straight along. The elephant will do me no harm, since I realize this to be true. So he ignored the warning of the Mahout and approached the elephant, and the elephant swung his trunk and swatted that disciple hard and threw him into the ditch where he was scratched with the brambles. Well, he was very upset, and he came crawling back to Sri Ramakrishna and said, "Master, you have deceived me. I understood that everything is Brahman, that I am Brahman, and all other creatures. Is that not so, Master?" And the Master said, "Yes, it is so." Well, he said, "I was walking out in the road, and I saw this elephant coming towards me. And it didn't seem to me to be necessary to get out of the way when the Mahout riding the elephant warned me to do so, because I figured that I was Brahman, and the elephant was Brahman, and I could come to no harm." You "You stupid man," said Sri Ramakrishna. "You didn't realize that the voice of the Mahout was also Brahman, and you should have heeded that too. So also in this case, the one who is trying to regain the vision is the disciple, and the vision they are trying to regain is the elephant. But the way you are actually feeling now, and which you are ignoring because of your eagerness to feel some other way, that is the voice of the Mahout. And that too is Brahman. Nine times out of 10, an observation of this kind will mean nothing, and will fall as flat as being told that everything in this universe is the smell of burnt almonds. But the 10th time, it will dawn upon you as a statement of total and luminous clarity. I do not think we need have any fear that this 10th time will never come, for in other circumstances it has come again and again. Think back to school days, when with the utmost care your teacher...
Every thing event in the world, anything, in other words, supposing the whole world is a moving pattern, and then you want to identify the wiggles in the pattern. It's very difficult to determine how much of a wiggle makes one wiggle. But by a sort of calculus in which we chew the thing up, we say all this wiggly world consists of so many wiggles, and each individual wiggle is a thing event. What is called in Japanese, ji, means a thing event. And so the idea of the doctrine of mutual interpenetration is that every thing event in the universe implies all the others. It goes with it. Doesn't matter how long it lasts or how short it lasts. The fact that it is or the fact that it was implies the existence of everything else. To put it in another way, the fact that there is a moth flying around me, it's very small, and it will soon run into a candle and extinguish itself. That little incident would not be possible at all except in the context of all these galaxies. Because their existence goes with the possibility of there being such a minute little life fluttering around. What is not so easy to see is the picture in the opposite direction. That in the same measure, all these galaxies depend upon and go with this little moth. As the poet Suso, Henry Suso, once said. No, it wasn't Suso. Someone like him, lived about the same time. I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, he said, "I know that without me, God could not live for one moment." And this is the other aspect of it. And this is the difficult one to understand. And we shall be able to approach this in the course of this seminar. In fact, if you realize that, then you've really got it. You've got the point of your own existence. But to get the reverse picture, you have first of all to get clearly its opposite one, namely that the existence of any one minute little thing is intimately related to everything. And then you can what happens when you clearly understand that, and you've really got that, your mind does a flip, like that. You know, it's like when you squeeze the air into a sausage balloon, and you get all the air squeezed up, you think, into one end of the balloon, and suddenly it goes and it comes out the other end, you see? Well, it's sort of like that. And you have to be very careful at that point not to go crazy. But because you see, when you find out that all this universe depends on you, some people get frightened, others get cocky, and from both things, disasters can follow. You have to discover that and then be natural. Act as if nothing happened. So then this Buddhist idea, Mahayana Buddhist idea of mutual interpenetration is expressed by the great simile of the net of jewels, in which you have a multidimensional spider's web in the morning dew, and on inspecting one dewdrop you see the reflections of all the others, and in each reflection, in turn, the reflections of all the others, and again, and again, and again. And so, of course, one discovers this to be no mere philosophical fancy, no mere metaphor, when you start working with laser beams and finding out that you can reconstruct a whole photograph from a tiny snip out of the negative. Because the crystalline structure of the whole photographic field, the chemicals spread over the acetate or whatever, when it's exposed to light, all those crystals change in harmony with each other. See, supposing we all touch each other, and then somebody says boo, we'll all jump a little bit together. And if you examine any one jump carefully enough, any one individual jumping, you will see, if you can find out enough about it, that the way he did it was in response to the ones next to him, and they did it in response to the ones next to them, and they jumped so far because they couldn't push any further, and some were a little bit pulled in their jump, and so on. And by seeing exactly what one of them did, you could reconstruct what all of them were doing. Only usually we don't bother to think about things like that, because it takes too long. And this is one of our great difficulties as human beings, that the mode of thinking upon which we largely rely for our practical calculations is unbelievably clumsy, because it can only deal with one thing at a time. And that doesn't get you anywhere. That's, in a way, why a great deal of scientific work is apt to be trivial. It's all very well if I had all that time to think it out. But I don't. I have to make practical decisions in a hurry. And no time. But on the other hand, here is nature. Here is your body. Not merely your body by itself as something bounded by the skin, but your body in relationship to a whole community of people and animals and bugs and vegetables, functioning in this astonishing way, doing myriads of things all together everywhere at once, and not thinking about it at all. It is astonishing, you know, how we overlook that. Because, of course, this is a faculty which everybody possesses. And therefore we say, well, that sort of cleverness is a dime a dozen. What we like to distinguish is special cleverness. People who can do strange tricks, like great feats of thinking and talking, and intellectual and cerebral performance. But we mustn't forget that there are also people who do absolutely astonishing things without thinking at all. There are jugglers. There are very beautiful people. That's pretty astonishing when you pick out someone and saying, gee, isn't she gorgeous? And that's done without thinking. And it embarrasses many women to be told that they're beautiful because they want to be admired for their intellectual achievements rather than for the bodies which their parents provided for them. And so we're a little bit on the defensive about the things that we achieve without our egos.
The simplest building block of a three-dimensional reality. So what's the simplest 3D bit of information? And that would be the 3-simplex known as the tetrahedron. The more we looked at it, the more we realized that you can model space-time and particle physics with just regular tetrahedra if you discover a code which you can get from projecting a higher dimensional crystal down to a lower dimensional space. You can get a construct made of tetrahedra where it's highly ordered, but it's not ordered like a checkerboard where it's deterministic. It's ordered with syntactical freedom, where you have to put pieces together this way and that way, but then with the third piece you have an option of turning the shape right or left. That's a geometric code or language. So you don't invent the language, it's given to you by first principles, just geometric first principles. When you take a cube, a wireframe of a cube, and you hold it up to the sun and you project it down as a shadow, you don't invent the way that those edges, the 12 edges of the cubes, shrink and fit together in the shadow. It's given to you by geometric first principles such as the Pythagorean theorem relating to the angle by which you projected it to the shadow. You can take a higher dimensional crystal and project it to 3 dimensions and get a 3-dimensional shadow, if you want to call it that. We project a slice of E8 crystal down to 3D, which produces a quasi-crystal code or language. And that allows these geometric symbols to build up to the ordinary world of particles and forces that we see around us. So that's our program, is to model physics with a quasi-crystal code made of the simplest bit of 3-dimensional information, the regular tetrahedron.
Seem to repeat. It will come back, perhaps in slightly different guises, slightly different forms, from its perspective to allow you the opportunity to get a particular message which will aid very greatly in your growth and expansion of consciousness. So therefore, understanding this, you can begin to be a bit more conscious about it and begin to look at how it serves you. For when you get... Oh, thank you. Allow me to begin this interaction with the entitlement. The referential, preferential you. Now we have discussed many times the concept of your imagination as being one of your primary facilities or tools that enable you, in that sense, to create the life that you wish, to lay down the template, to lay down the model, to lay down the mold, if you will, that will enable you to begin to build that life, to be that very life. And many of you in attending these interactions and participating or listening to these sessions on what you call your tape format have perhaps on some level understood what we have said, have perhaps on some level seen, shall we say, the usefulness of this idea. But we do find that for many of you it remains just that, a concept, just that, a notion that perhaps would be nice if it were only true. Therefore, this evening of your time, we will participate with you, each and every one of you, in the formation of each and every one of your versions of that referential preferential. Now again, we remind you that your imagination in your society is generally used as a generator of fantasy. Many times in the form of an escape, many times in the form of a preference that you truly feel will never happen. But that is only one side of that coin. That is only one side of the imagination. When, in that sense, you view the imagination as a tool, you then get use from that tool that is very, very specific, very, very individual, very, very tailored, if you will. Therefore, once you have created the notion of the referential, preferential you, or perhaps you can say the you that if you had your druthers, you would be. In that imagination, and together we will form the mold. Together we will form the birth of this you, and then perhaps describe some of the other applications for it once having done that. So therefore, in your own time, become comfortable in your seat. Now understand that what you are about to create, and perhaps for many of you recreate, will be something that will, shall we say, stick around with you. Being that it is your creation, no one can take it from you. And being that it is your direct extension, expression, you will never in that sense need anyone else in order to call it forth. So it is in that sense, by its very creation, by its very identification from you, a tool of empowerment that once you have, you can never lose, and again need no one else in order to express. It is part and parcel of it. Therefore, in order to, again, create a conducive atmosphere for the creation of this referential, and at the same time, unify and unitize and, shall we say, align all individuals present. If you will form it out in unison, take 3 deep and loving breaths. That as you breathe together, co-inspire, conspire, an alignment takes place, but that alignment also exists within each and every one of you. So now as you do relax, as you do settle in, feel yourself, blank the screen of your imagination, and allow yourself to perceive what you may be called the black behind your closed eyes. Now, before we proceed, understand that there is no way to do this incorrectly. And in fact, your imagination, being that that's the screen that you are looking at right now, will assist you. Trust that that assistance is part of the very tool that we are speaking of, and allow whatever embellishments occur from your imagination to be the exact embellishments that make it that much more relevant to you. Now we will begin by allowing to emerge from this blackness, again at whatever pace is natural and comfortable for you, the outline of your body, emerging from the blackness. If there is something that you would physically like to alter about your body, allow that outline in that sense to represent any changes. If you feel you're a bit too thin, then in that sense, picture it being a bit more robust and vice versa. In any way, have this outline be the you prefer to be, but do not remove it from yourself. Still understand that you are seeing you. As you do begin to perceive against the background of the blackness, the outline figure, allow it to be slightly backlit by a blue-white light, so it stands out that much more. And you can see the difference between perhaps the blackness within the outline and the background by that demarcation line of blue-white light. Now, again, allow what you would call the features, the color, the topography of, perhaps for now, the front of the...
Only with the passport. Will you allow me to say something? Only with the passport. You want to look at passport?
Have you finished?
It's income. That in this atomic age of speed, we are shut in and shut off by passport.
If you'll shut up and let somebody else talk.
And free speech, does that exist?
No, you've got it all.
And free enterprise.
We were talking of passports.
Today it's all monopoly.
All right. Now will you...
Can I go into the automobile business and compete with the upper class?
If I can get in a word.
Not a chance. Can I go into the grocery business and compete with the chain store?
Will you shut up?
Not a chance. Monopoly is the menace of free enterprise. As I look back 60 years ago.
Where were you 60 years ago?
He was a glint in his great grandfather's eye.
Very well now. Have you finished? Now let me say something. Let me tell you how wrong you are. In the first place. In the first place. Now I've forgotten what I wanted to say.
And the atomic bomb. It's a crime that when the world cries for atomic energy, you want to make atomic bombs.
Me? I'm against atomic bombs.
You want to wipe out civilization, destroy all life on this planet. You kill creatures living in this night.
I lost my dream. I didn't need atomic bombs.
You and your kind think that atomic bombs can solve your problems.
Listen, you little rat.
Today man has too much power. The Roman Empire collapsed with the assassination of Caesar. And why? Because of too much power. Feudalism blew up with the French Revolution. And why? Because of too much power. And today the whole world will blow up. And why?
Because of too much power.
The monopoly of power is a menace to freedom. It degrades and victimizes every individual. And where is the individual?
I don't know.
Lost in terror because it's made to hate instead of love. If civilization is to survive, we must combat power until the dignity and peace of man are restored.
Was a declaration of personality. That is to say, I'm the kind of fellow who doesn't believe that there's someone up there who cares. That's for little old ladies. I'm a tough guy. I believe that life is at root meaningless, and I'm going to face the hard facts. Incidentally, nobody ever talks about soft facts. So I believe it's all empty, and that the only thing is that the meaning of life, of human life, consists in the heroic conflict with tragedy. We're all going to end up in the dustbin. Excuse me, the ash can. And there's no future. Finally, it's empty. And then we come across Buddhists, because the world is all closing in, you see. People on the other side of the world who think that emptiness is a great thing. Wawi, they say, shunyata in Sanskrit, emptiness. If you can understand that you are basically emptiness, you're a Buddha. You're enlightened. You're awakened. Isn't that weird? From a Western point of view, that seems absolutely crazy. We call it nihilism. That's awful. But the basic formula of Buddhism is Shiki Sokuze Ku. Ku Sokuze Shiki. That which is emptiness is also precisely form. That which is form is also precisely emptiness. Now what does that mean? You know, they all get and sit together in the Zen monasteries and elsewhere, and they chant this sutra. Makahanya haramita shingyo. And that goes, there's some shiki sokuze, ku sokuze, shiki, etc., bong, bong, bong. And finally it ends up with a kind of gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, om svaha. What's all that about? Excuse me, I have a little cough because I've just been to London and picked up the London flu. So, now think about this. What do you mean by the idea of clarity? Clear. The word clear in English can be spelt in different ways. C-L-E-A-R, C-L-E-R-E, C-L-E-V-E-R, C-L-E-R-G-Y. They're all on the same root. A clergyman, a cleric, a clerk is supposed to be someone who's clear. Like Ron Hubbard, he invented the word clear, you see, used it for somebody who had developed Dianetic proficiency. Clear. And what do we mean by this word? When you say it's a clear day, it means there's no smog. And so the air is empty. And as a result of the fact that the air is empty, all the forms are articulate in detail. When your head is clear, when your vision is clear, all the details can be made out. So that is why emptiness equals form. That's marvelous. So therefore, I think that the most essential ingredient of an academic discipline is to clear our heads. For some reason, my lectures are always attended by dogs. Now, to clear our heads. Now, how do you do that? This is the most important adjunct to intellectual discipline. I say this most urgently because here we are, we're at the University of California, and we are all presumably intellectuals. And we need to further the intellectual life. We need to further the disciplines of learning languages, of psychology, of science, of physics and chemistry, medicine, and so on and so forth. But underlying that, there must be a background. In other words, you need plain white paper in order to write something. And so in the same way, underlying all our thinking, there must be emptiness. And that's what we call in Asia, jhana, which means the practice of meditation. You can also call it yoga. These are really, there are little nitpicking details we might make between them, but they're really equivalent words. Jhana, yoga, Zen, and of course also the Sufi disciplines are all the same thing, but they're largely missing in Western religion, because Western religion is excessively talkative, excessively didactic, and does not really practice silence. The nearest thing we have, we have some Catholic orders, like Trappists, and we have the Quakers, who practice silent disciplines, but I'm rather inclined to believe that they talk to themselves while they're silent. Real silence, jhana, is stopping talking to yourself inside your head. Is to get real mental silence. Now, that doesn't mean that you have a blank mind. You are vividly aware of what is, only you don't give it any name. Now, if you, for the moment, would experiment with this by closing your eyes and listening to all sounds whatsoever that are going on.
other words, he makes a clay figurine, and then he breathes into it, and it becomes alive, because the clay becomes informed. By itself it is formless, it has no intelligence, and therefore it requires an external intelligence and an external energy to bring it to life and to put some sense into it. And so in this way, we inherit a conception of ourselves as being artifacts, as being made, and it is perfectly natural in our culture for a child to ask its mother, how was I made? Or who made me? And this is a very, very powerful idea, but for example, it is not shared by the Chinese or by the Hindus. A Chinese child would not ask its mother, how was I made? A Chinese child might ask its mother, how did I grow? Which is an entirely different procedure from making. You see, when you make something, you put it together, you arrange parts, or you work from the outside to the in, as a sculptor works on a stone, or as the potter works on clay. But when you watch something growing, it works in exactly the opposite direction. It works from the inside to the outside. It expands, it burgeons, it blossoms, and it happens all over itself at once. In other words, the original simple form, say, of a living cell in the womb, progressively complicates itself. And that's the growing process, and it's quite different from the making process. But we have thought historically, you see, of the world as something made, the idea being that trees, for example, are constructions, just as tables and houses are constructions. And so there is, for that reason, a fundamental difference between the made and the maker. And this image, this ceramic model of the universe, originated in cultures where the form of government was monarchical, and where, therefore, the maker of the universe was conceived also at the same time in the image of the king of the universe. King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all dwellers upon earth. I'm quoting the Book of Common Prayer. And so, all those people who are oriented to the universe in that way feel related to basic reality as a subject to a king. And so they are on very, very humble terms in relation to whatever it is that works all this thing. I find it odd in the United States that people who are citizens of a republic have a monarchical theory of the universe. Because we are carrying over from very ancient Near Eastern cultures the notion that the Lord of the universe must be respected in a certain way. People kneel, people bow, people prostrate themselves. Because, and you know what the reason for all that is, that nobody is more frightened of everybody else than a tyrant. He sits with his back to the wall, and his guards on either side of him. And he has you face downwards on the ground because you can't use weapons that way. When you come into his presence, you don't stand up and face him because you might attack. And he has reason to fear that you might, because he's ruling you all. And the man who rules you all is the biggest crook in the bunch, because he's the one who's succeeded in crime The other people are pushed aside because the criminals, the people we lock up in jail, are simply the people who didn't make it. So naturally, the real boss sits with his back to the wall and his henchmen on either side of him. And so when you design a church, what does it look like? Catholic church with the altar as it used to be. It's changing now because the Catholic religion is changing. But the Catholic church has the altar with its back to the wall at the east end of the church. And there, the altar is the throne, and the priest is the chief vizier of the court, and he is making obeisance to the throne in front, but there is the throne of God, the altar. And all the people are facing it and kneeling down. And a great Catholic cathedral is called a basilica, from the Greek basilis, which means king. So a basilica is the house of a king. And the ritual of the Catholic Church is based on the court rituals of Byzantium. A Protestant church is a little different, but basically the same. The furniture of a Protestant church is based on a judicial courthouse. The pulpit. The judge in an American court wears a black robe. He wears exactly the same dress as a Protestant minister. And everybody sits in these boxes. Like there's a jury box, there's a box for the judge, there's a box for this, a box for that, and those are the pews in an ordinary kind of colonial type Protestant church. So both these kinds...
On it, everyone you love, everyone you know,
vanishes. Every time I touch inside, you get a sensation externally of intense reality. And I say, after all, I was only just pushing things in your brain. You see what a push-button thing you are? That's it. I can just poke around and you can see anything. But all that's happening is I'm putting a little electrode or something on certain parts of your brain. That's all you are, poor fish. You're just that kind of a sensitive sponge inside your head bone. Well, that gets very persuasive, you see. And people are therefore in a position, they are prejudiced to favor a mythology that will make out that you are, after all, nothing but something or other. Nothing but a kind of complicated neurological jello. And that point of view, as I said, has become enormously convincing. It's plausible today, whereas the old point of view of God the Father and all the angels isn't plausible. It seems kind of weird in relation to what we know about the state of the universe. Now, what we have to see is that both of these points of view are equally mythological. And there's no more reason to take one than the other. And that what these points of view reflect are nothing other than certain attitudes to living. Now you see, if you want to live in a way that always is saying, I think that life is disgusting. Supposing you want to deny being, then you can always describe it in ways that are offensive. You can always say playing the violin is just scraping cat's entrails with horsehair. That puts it down, and you say, and you say people who play golf, they're a bunch of idiots who go out on take a walk, and they hit a stupid little ball with sticks. Or that people who like music are just a bunch of idiots who sit around and go out of their minds listening to a lot of complicated noises. See, there's always a way of talking about something to make it sound terrible. Equally, there's a way of talking about something to make it sound great. Now, what do you want to do? Do you want to live your life in such a way that you're always saying to it, Is that a good way to conduct things? Or do you want to live your life in such a way that you say, come on, let's go. You see, let's swing this thing. On the one hand, you see, you're always in tension against it. Do you remember I pointed out to you in this morning that the person who's anxious, constantly anxious, is the person who is resisting the flip-flopability of things. Life is vibrating. It's going blip, 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 blip all the time. The anxious person says, God's sake, don't do that. Because, you know, you might do it too much. I don't want to blip like this. It makes me feel nervous. Stop it. And so, as he puts his weight on this blip, blip, he goes like this. You see, gets tripping. So instead of saying, come on, let's blip, let's go, and do this thing. So in exactly the same way, the person who wants to say, well, you're nothing but some kind of chemicals, and they're just a lot of. You're a bag of pus and blood, basically, with a few bones inside. And
you know, we're in space already, way out. Anybody care to be sensitive and let what's outside space come to you? You can, if your eyes are clear enough. Aided by telescopes, aided by radio astronomy, aided by all the kind of sensitive instruments we can devise. We are as far out in space as we're ever going to get. But, you know, sensitivity is especially in the WASP culture of the United States. We define manliness in terms of aggression. You see, because we're a little bit frightened of whether we are really men. And so we put on this great show of being tough guys. Completely unnecessary. If you have what it takes, you don't need to put on that show. You don't need to be negative. Why be hostile to me? Because after all, you are the you grow out of this mystical universe in just exactly the same way that an apple grows off an apple tree. So let's say the tree which grows apples is a tree which apples, using apple as a verb. And a world in which human beings arrive is a world that peoples. And so the existence of people is symptomatic of the kind of universe we live in. You, as a human being, you grow out of this mystical universe in just exactly the same way that an apple grows off an apple tree. So let's say the tree which grows apples is the tree which apples, using apples as well. And a world in which human beings arrive is a world that peoples. So the existence of people is symptomatic of the kind of universe we live in. Just a spot on somebody's skin is symptomatic that you can
When you want to destroy someone, you always define them as unpeople. So when we have this hostility to the external world because of the superstition, the myth, the absolutely unfounded theory that, see, and this character means can be, or can, able, something like that. So the way which can be, then give it its second meaning, spoken, described, uttered. But it also means the way that can be weighed. Not W-E-I-G-H, but W-A-Y-E-D. You'd have to invent that word. The way that can be traveled, perhaps, is not the eternal way. In other words, there is no way in which the Tao, or following the Tao, can, there's no recipe for it. I can't give you any do-it-yourself instructions, A, B, C, D, as to how it's done. It was like when Louis Armstrong was asked, what is jazz? He said, if you have to ask, you don't know. Now that's awkward, isn't it? But we can gather what it is by absorbing certain atmospheres and attitudes connected with those who follow. And from the art, and poetry, and all the expressions and the anecdotes and stories that illustrate the philosophy of the way. So, this word, then, the way or the course of things, is not, you must understand this, some Christian missionaries translated Tao as the Logos, taking as their point of departure the opening passage of St. John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word. Now, if you look up the Chinese translation of the Bible, it says in the beginning was the Tao. The Tao was with God, and the Tao was God. The same as in the beginning was God. All things were made by it, and without it was not anything made. So they substituted Tao there. Now that will make a very funny effect on a Chinese philosopher, because the idea of things being made by the Tao is absurd. The Tao is not a manufacturer, and it's not a governor. It doesn't rule, as it were, in the position of a king. Although the book, the Tao Te Ching, is written for many purposes, but one of its important purposes is as a manual of guidance for a ruler. And what it tells him is essentially, rule by not ruling. Don't lord it over the people. And so he says the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over. And when good things are accomplished, it lays no claim to them. In other words, the Tao doesn't stand up and say, I have made all of you, I have filled this earth with its beauty and glory, fall down before me and worship. The Tao, having done anything, always escapes, and is not around to receive any thanks or acknowledgement, because it loves obscurity. And Lao Tzu said the Tao is like
of your joy, of your passion. Why? Because you say it is. And you flow with it, and thus find out that it is. Or resist it for as long as you want. And keep walking on the same road until you get to the washed out bridge and go, oh, why didn't I listen to my intuition back there? Because you thought you were in charge, smarty. But you're not. Not you alone. You are in charge, but not you alone, physical mind. Physical mind, higher self. That's the you that's in charge. Both aspects of your being is the persona, not just the physical personality self. That's only a part of it. So if you want to know you're in charge, you have to behave like the whole you. And be willing to open up and receive and perceive in whatever way it works for you, the dialogue and the communication coming from the portion of yourself that is the higher self, that has the higher point of view, that has the bigger picture. And be willing to understand it's working on your behalf. It's not going to trick you. It's not going to deceive you. The only thing in your reality that can create the idea of tricks and deception is the physical mind's belief system, not the higher self. Because it is only in physical, three-dimensional reality that you can have the experience of a personality structure that can actually deny its own truth. So any tricks, any deception that you may be afraid of encountering can only actually be coming from the personality aspect that's actually afraid it's going to be deceived. That's the paradox. It can't come from the higher self because that's a bigger picture point of view. And it can clearly see the road. And there is no reason, there is no logic for the higher self to go, yeah, take the left road. Watch and see how my lower self falls into the river. This ought to be fun. Oops, I went with it. You are under the assumption that the higher self is immune from what you experience in physical reality. Incorrect. You are one being, and the higher self will suffer the slings and arrows that the physical mind shoots itself with. You are one being, and it is not detached from you, and it is not immune to the consequences of the physical mind's choices. But because the higher self is closer to the vibration of unconditional love, it will overlook it again and again and again and again, attempting to unconditionally loving you, reminding you, please take the other road, please. Oh, here we go again. It is not immune to the consequences of the physical mind's acts and choices. Do not assume that it is. But it is close enough to unconditional love to forgive it. And to keep giving you the benefit of the doubt. That's the relationship of your higher self. That's its job. To keep on guiding you no matter what.
Because you see, we think so much in terms of cause and effect.
Because it is the vibration of unconditional love that the physical mind